With the finale of Shogun recently being aired, it provided an ending that was well worth the wait, and it was better than I could have ever predicted. With the novel, the 80s miniseries, and this show all kind of finishing off at a similar point in time, it got me wanting to look into the real historical figures more and work out what happened following where we left this show at. Obviously, we had the flash forward which showed us the Battle of Sekigahara, but what was the outcome of it? What happened to the victor, the loser, and many of the characters that remained in Edo and Osaka? Well, I thought I'd answer exactly that. So let's get into it. Here were the historical events that happened after Shogun. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers, the Battle of Sekigahara and Isidore's fate. This was the battle that many people wanted to see in the show, and we got glimpses of it when it came to the flash forward that occurred in Toranaga's speech to Ieyasu. With regards to the real Battle of Sekigahara, it was an important battle that sealed the fate on whether or not the Western Army led by Ishido Matari or the Eastern Army led by Ieyasu Tokugawa would reign victorious. By the time the Battle of Sekigahara came around, Tokugawa actually had more men when it came to fighting, something that was actually a surprise. Ishido initially had 120,000 men and Tokugawa had 75,000. But when they met on the battlefield, Ishido had 81,000 and Ieyasu Tokugawa had 88,000. This was for a wide number of reasons. One was because Tokugawa had actually been speaking with daimyos that had sworn loyalty to Ishido and promised them land if they were to switch allegiances, which was the case with some of them. Plus, also, many of Ishido's men defected, up to around 20,000. Some of them wanted to just stay clear of the conflict and not commit their loyalties to any of the sides to ultimately avoid death. So even though Ishido Matari had significantly more numbers to start with, that was something that soon changed, and it meant that the odds went against him. Ieyasu Tokugawa and the Eastern Army reigned supreme when it came to the Battle of Sekigahara as they destroyed the defensive position that Ishido had set his army up in, and many of the daimyos changing sides went against Ishido. This meant that he had to retreat as it changed the tides of the battle. The fall of the Western Army came when Ishido realized that he pretty much had no more support, and Ishido himself fled the battlefield. After fleeing, he was found by some villagers nearby and was executed in Kyoto. Afterwards, his head was displayed publicly for everybody in Kyoto to see. Ishido Matari wasn't remembered that well in the history books. However, time is something that has served the historical figure well, as it is said that if people had stayed loyal to him and not been so quick to switch sides, then he may have actually had a chance of being victorious on the battlefield, and that could have changed history completely. But for him, it just wasn't meant to be. What happened to the real-life John Blackthorne post-Shun? With regards to John Blackthorne, the real-life historical figure was William Adams. And where we left him in the show, he was ordered to help build Japan's first Western-style ship, and that was something that was actually completed, and it was built to the size of being about 80 tons. It was then the next year where Adams was then tasked with building an even larger ship, which was 120 tons. With regards to the other crew members that William arrived in Japan with, many of them were allowed to eventually leave Japan, and in the year 1605, most of them did choose to do so. After the shogun had grown to trust William Adams, he eventually appointed him as a diplomatic and trade advisor, and he became his personal advisor for all things that were connected to the Western world. William Adams even became the official interpreter, showing that he learned the language, embraced the culture, and was viewed completely differently to how he was when he first arrived. He was no longer the barbarian. He would wear Japanese attire, and when other Englishmen later arrived in Japan, he preferred to be around the Japanese people. Eventually, he was also given permission as well to enter the palace whenever he pleased, and was able to speak with Ieyasu Tokugawa as and when he needed to. Even though Tokugawa respected Adams, he didn't actually ever allow him to leave the country like many of the other crew members were given permission to do. Even though William wasn't allowed to leave, he still sent payments back to his wife back home in England. I feel this showed a particularly interesting side to the figure, as that's something that he didn't need to do, but he did choose to do so. Even though he had a wife and children back home in England, he did eventually go on to marry somebody else in Japan, where he had a further 2 children, a son and a daughter. In the letters that William wrote, he mentioned how he respected and cared a lot for the people of Japan and their civilization. One of the first lines that Blackthorne said in the show when he arrived in Japan was that he referred to the people as savages, but within the show, that mindset changed, and he grew to respect and understand them. So it makes sense as to why we saw a shift in the character, as well as the relationship building that William did with Tokugawa. He also contributed to the development and establishments of trading rights and passes which connected to other nations. So William Adams was an important figure in the Tokugawa shogunate. William Adams died north of Nagasaki on the 16th of May, 1620 at 55 years old. What happened to Toranaga Tokugawa? One interesting thing that occurred with Tokugawa is the siege of Osaka Castle that Tokugawa led. He planned on taking over Osaka Castle, which contained the real-life Lady Oyen Noada and the heir to the former Tao. There was a failed attempt in 1614 where a peace treaty was then drawn up, but in 1615, Tokugawa showed that the treaty wasn't worth the paper that it was written on, and he stormed the castle, and with Osaka Castle up in flames, Yodo Dano, which is Lady Oyen Noada, and Hayari, both committed seppuku, which ended the Toyotomi legacy, the name which the former Tao passed down. So the loyalty that was depicted in the FX show by Lady Oyen Noada was something which meant nothing in reality. Tokugawa felt as though he needed to take out the heir because the people that opposed the Tokugawa rule were rallying around who they believed was the rightful heir, the former Tao's son. So it was the one threat that he felt he faced in having total control and being the dominating clan in Japan. Tokugawa became shogun at the age of 60 years old, and the Tokugawa shogunate that he formed would eventually go on to rule Japan for the next 260 years. After only a couple of years, Tokugawa abdicated his position of shogun in 16605, and his son was a successor. There are a few different speculations as to why he stepped down, but some ideas point to the fact that he may have wanted to make it easier to get the successor that he wanted, which was his son. Even though he stepped down, this didn't actually impact the power that Ieyasu Tokugawa had, and with his son adopting the title of shogun, Ieyasu was still a force that was present. He was just now acting as the retired shogun. When it came to the death of Ieyasu Tokugawa, he died at the age of 73 in 1616. It's thought that he died of either cancer or syphilis. Yushi's death didn't happen. With regards to the death of Yushi, that was a moment that was actually one of the best scenes in the finale, but it's sad to say that it never actually happened in reality. The historical figure that Yushi was based on, Honda Masanobu, died in 1616, the same year as Ieyasu Tokugawa. When looking at why Yushi was given this fictional betrayal arc, I think it could be connected to the fact that back in 1563, there was an uprising that occurred against Ieyasu Tokugawa, and Masanobu took the side of the peasants, which was against him. After fleeing, though, he eventually took the side of Ieyasu a couple of decades later. He also eventually went on to fight in the Battle of Sekigahara on the side of Ieyasu Tokugawa and the Eastern Army. So I feel the betrayal that was present is probably inspired by the fact that in the early parts of this history, Masanobu was once against Tokugawa before he eventually took the side of him. With the ending of Shogun, it didn't provide closure or clarity in the traditional sense because it wasn't centered around giving us that final chapter. It was all about us seeing inside of Toranaga's mind and everything that he was doing in order to eventually become shogun. Shogun wasn't the endgame. It was merely the beginning, hence why we never saw him become it. Tokugawa had a long reign of shogun and retired shogun and formed a clan that spanned a quarter of a millennia, which is incredible when you think about it. These fictional characters that we saw being depicted on screen over the course of a couple of months were real people in history, and I'd urge you all to try and learn a bit more about them because their stories are so interesting to read about. And after watching the show, I think you gain a newfound appreciation for them, the time period, and who they were. So there you have it, the historical events that happened after Shogun. If you want to see more videos on Shogun, then click on the card in the top corner. I've broken down every episode in the show, and also delved into the historical figures one by one. So if you want to see more videos on the show, then head over to the channel. What did you think of Shogun? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, thanks for tuning into the video, and I'll see you in the next one.